Hey everybody, welcome to episode 67 of Is That Normal podcast. And today we're continuing with part 2 of our series on blowing it.
Yep. Last episode we talked about what you do when your kids blow it. So go back and check that out if you missed it. Some great stuff there, some real practical steps, some good advice I think we were able to give there. And as we talked about that, Randall, did you have some highlights from that part of this series?
Well, I mean, anytime you share a fart story, I'm always game. That's why I'm do so well working with youth, is I'm always up for a good fart story.
Right. That's right.
But no, really practically, just that evaluation of how we handle, and really what is our ultimate goal of how we approach when our kids mess up. What is our response, and our response should be dictated by what is our ultimate goal. It's not to just fix the immediate, but to help them grow from it and learn and understand and be better moving forward.
Which is such a huge overarching thing I think about a lot of what we want to advise and help people and resource people to do is we gotta work with the end in mind. So yeah,
absolutely.
That's really good.
But today we're going to turn the tables a little bit and talk about what we do when we blow it with our kids. And so, what kind of tempers did you have in your household growing up? What was that like?
Yeah. It was an extremely polarized situation in my house, I would say. And I don't want to paint it like things were bad or horrible. And I love my mom and my dad. My dad's passed away, but I love them both and learned so much. And even as I've gotten older, it's kind of one of those things like, when you hit about 25, you realize how smart your parents were. And I definitely saw that. But, my dad was definitely a gruff person. He didn't usually pull any punches to let you know what he was thinking, and oftentimes it was loudly and pretty aggressively. Definitely, he had a sense of like high responsibility, and he didn't have a whole lot of tolerance for you not meeting that expectation. And so if you didn't, it was like, what's wrong with you? What's your problem? Can you not do this right? And so sometimes that was somewhat explosive. To the point where I definitely had some anxiety about my performance whenever I was doing something for my dad, wondering how he was going to respond. And my mom, on the other hand, is like the most laid back, accommodating person I've probably ever met in my whole life. She has this super long fuse, does not blow up, does not get mad, doesn't let things rock her boat. But so much so at the point where sometimes things didn't get addressed when they needed to get addressed. I was recently part of a training where we were talking about personalities, and there's a lot of personality types, but there's kind of these 4 categories, and my mom and I both are really probably in this category of people who are very people oriented, that are want to keep the peace, and and they said the thing about them is that they'll just take the things from other people until they've had enough, and then they snap, And so I did,
where'd that come from?
Yeah, and I did see my mom do that a few times, but that was super rare, And so that's kind of the dynamic I grew up in. And so in that, as we'll talk about, when you blow it with your kids, there's lots of ways you can blow it with your kids, and I saw experiences in both kind of those polarizations as I grew up.
Yeah, and share some of the same similarities as far as growing up in a household where there was short tempers, short fuses, and a lot of yelling and things like that, and again, a lot of that. You come home with a report card and it's all A minuses, and it's like, well, why can't that be A's? Those should be straight A. Always feeling like no matter what you do, you're just a little bit short of what the goal is. Yeah. And those things have a long-term effect on how you see the world, and how I function as an adult, and how I respond to things. And so, how has that affected your parenting? Just what you talked about as far as kind of what your life was
you have all these things happen when you become a parent. You have these things. I would call them vows that you make. Like things I'm never going to do as a parent, and sometimes those are or things I'm always going to do, and sometimes those are birthed out of experiences we had growing up, saying I'm never going to parent that way because I didn't like that, or I'm always going to parent this way because I like that or didn't like that, and so but it because of that, it's kind of put me in this like bizarre like dichotomy or balance of between passivity, because I don't want to be overbearing. I don't want to make my kids feel like they don't measure up, so much so that sometimes I err on maybe not being as forceful. And then I also, have this other side of just being so caring and wanting things to turn out so well that I overcompensate and do too much for them. And so it's just, so I'm creating my own polarization, maybe different than one I grew up in, but I have that. But then of course in all of that, then you have those moments where, I yell or blow up, or I have those short fuse moments and I'm like, oh, that's just like what happened to me when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And it's the I'm turning into my dad moments, that we kind of joke about, but it definitely happens.
Yeah, absolutely. So today let's talk about those tensions and just how we respond.
Yeah.
Well, welcome back, and as we mentioned, we're kind of in part 2 now of what we do when we blow it. Part 1, we talked about what happens when our kids blow it and how we respond, and now this one maybe hits a little closer to home. Of what happens when we blow it and how do we respond and deal with that. And so we to be healthy, we know we have to make an intentional plan of how we do respond when that happens, and so that's kind of what we're going to talk about today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think intentional is such a good word, and I know we seem to say it a lot, but I think it's really what it is making a decision beforehand. I don't want to wait till the moment. I don't want to respond out of just pure emotion or adrenaline. I want to make a decision beforehand how I'm going to do things. And I know for Shannon and I, my wife, that principle has helped us, be not just better parents, better people, better followers of Christ, better leaders, better everything. When we live a lifestyle where we say, I'm going to decide these type of things beforehand so I don't have to wonder how I'm going to handle it when I get there. And, so for me, that kind of points to this first step of don't be passive. If we're gonna deal with our own brokenness, we have to not be passive about it. A glaring example of how not to do that in the Bible is King David, who is famous for a lot of things. Famous for being a man after God's own heart, writing the book of Psalms, being a great king. But he's maybe most famous for sleeping with someone else's wife and having her husband killed. And those are pretty big, blow-its. But through it all, he hid it, he lied about it, he waited. He just was hoping that if he just waited this out, just go away, and everything be okay. And in that, it's so tragic. In Psalm 51, he kind of talks about his response after he gets confronted with his sin by the prophet Nathan. And he says in there this strange thing. And we mentioned Dr. Kimmel last week and his book. And in his book, he actually talks about this because he has the same question I've always had. How can David say that he sinned against God and God only? Because how many other people's lives were totally devastated and broken because of his choice, and his choice to stay passive and not do anything after he had sinned. And so things could have went way differently. Obviously, if he'd never sinned, but it could have went way differently if he'd immediately said, not 2 years later, not never, that he would have said, I've done the wrong thing and I'm going to respond to it. And so we've got to learn how to be intentional in our parenting, but also in our failures.
Yeah. So what might that look like?
At the base of our belief in God is this fact that we're all sinners and we fall short of God's glory. And so if I'm going to deal with my personal sin and my spiritual health, it starts out by me acknowledging my mistakes to God and asking him for forgiveness. So that's the basis of my relationship with God, of what Christianity is all about, is me admitting I'm a sinner in need of a Savior. And so we need to make seeking God a priority. We need to put that first. We need to get our own relationship with God right first. That has got to be our number one priority in this. But here's the interesting thing. When I come to God and I say, God, I've blown it. I've made a mistake. I've sinned just like David did. And please forgive me. Often God's next step is then to command us to go and make things right with other people. Like the outpouring of our relationship with God is often him commanding us to go and get things right with other people. And so I've got to learn how to seek forgiveness and offer forgiveness to others as I get my relationship with God right.
Yeah. And that's really difficult, especially when we're talking about from the family perspective and as parents, because I think there's kind of just an inherent part of us that thinks we don't want to show any cracks to our kids. We want them to think that we know best and we've got it all together. And so there's a little bit of that humbling that has to happen to go to your children and say, hey, I messed up. And so that's really kind of counter to our nature.
Yeah, and I think really as we talk through this whole process of how do I respond when I've blown it, not just with my kids, but just in general, how do I respond? It's this continually deepening level of humility and surrender that we have to get to. So after I recognize I need to do something, I try to get things right with God. I think the next level then is that I say sorry to those I need to say sorry to with no buts attached. And like you said, sometimes that's the hardest with our kids, because I know for me with my kids, I'm always in this mode. No matter what gear I try to shift into, I'm always in this mode of trying to, give advice, correction, point them in the right direction. So even in my these moments, usually when I'm asking for forgiveness, there's two sides of that story. They've probably done something, or I've done something, and they've done something, and so there's things to deal with there, and so it's really easy to go in and say, yeah, I did this thing, but we got to deal with this thing that you did, and we've got to get to a point where we just slow down and we say, you know what, I'm really sorry. I should not have yelled. I'm really sorry. I should not have said that. I'm really sorry. I shouldn't have done that. I'm really sorry that I let you down in this way. And don't put the but you should on after that. We can deal. I mean, those might be things that need to be dealt with. But we got to deal with this first.
Yeah. But and that not only is that a something for us internally, but boy, that sets an example for them as to how we handle our business when we blow it. Of not putting those qualifiers on things when you've messed up, to set that example of, hey, let's face it head on and say, hey, I messed up, and not have all those qualifiers to it. And it just sets a great example for them.
Absolutely. And that's like you said this earlier. I mean, it's that intentional parenting, that looking at the long game. What's our goal? My hope is I do that, first and foremost, that our relationship stays healthy, but then that they learn to act in the same way, to own their own mistakes in the same way that I'm showing them I will. Yeah. Yeah,
absolutely. So that tension that happens, are there things we can do to help foster that better?
Yeah, I think there's two things. Again, going deeper into this surrender issue is more than just situationally being willing to say I'm sorry and do that quickly, is to just maintain an overall attitude of brokenness. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Incredibles, the Pixar Disney movie, but there's one of my favorite scenes in it. There's the costume designer Edna Mode, and the main character's there trying to get a new suit, and he's like, and it's got to have a cape, and she's like, no capes, and she goes through this whole thing. Super funny scene. But about Bob Goff, who I mentioned last episode as well, he just shares his heart about that, is that we so often, like you said a minute ago, think we have got to show no weakness, that we've got to be the hero, that we've got to be the strong one, but we're not the hero.
Yeah.
We're not the hero of the Bible. We're not the hero of our lives. We're not the hero of our kids' lives. Christ has got to be that hero. God has got to be that hero. And if I want that to be what happens at the end, and them not trying to just live on their own strength and self-sufficiency, I have to show that I'm trusting in something bigger than myself. And so that starts with me saying, I have flaws. I have mistakes. It's okay to be honest about the mistakes of your past. I know I've been pretty open with my kids about a lot of the boneheaded things I've done in my life and when I was their age, because I want to show them not only that I'm not perfect, but this is how God dealt with me, because I was willing to admit I wasn't perfect. Yeah. And that's been a really good thing. So if we make a habit of admitting our flaws and our struggles and our temptations, showing how we've had God help us deal with that, I think it softens our children's responses to us. It makes us more human to them, and there's a softening in the way they respond. But it frees us up to be honest, and that we can have this conversation that leads us to recognizing the next thing, which is that we got to point them to Christ. Yeah. If we want our life and their life to be fixed, we have to point them to Christ. I remember this moment And I think, my kids were still pretty young when I realized it, but I think I had 3 or 4 kids by this point. It just occurred to me one day, because I always wanted to be the best parent I could, because I wanted to raise my kids the right way. I wanted to be the best. I've always grown up wanting to be the best at whatever I do, and so I really want to be a good parent. And so, but I came to this realization that I was never going to be a perfect parent, but I could point them to someone who was perfect. And so I want to be living my life in a way that points them to the perfection of Christ and what he does in our life, not to a perfect dad who never makes any mistakes. Because that's going to lead them to think they can rely on themselves, and we want them to learn to rely on God throughout their whole life.
Yeah. And ultimately, we may initially think we want our kids to model and be who we are, but we really want them to be who God is. Absolutely. We want them to be Christ-like, not right. Just like us.
Absolutely.
So, great thoughts. And so, as we kind of wrap up, any last thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, just to kind of recap for us, I think we have to be willing to quickly do something about things when we blow it, and that's going to start with our surrender. We got to surrender to God, but then we also have to surrender to acknowledge our mistakes to our kids, because that is what's going to allow us to point them back to God in the end. And so it's this kind of this cycle that we got to go through. But as we evaluate that and we see this as a cycle, one thing we have to notice is, are there problems that are coming up over and over again in my life? Things that I'm doing, habits I have, reactions I have. And when I recognize those things, sometimes we have to come to the really hard surrender point of saying, I'm not going to fix this by myself, or just even being intentional in how I make decisions. Yeah. I need some outside help to deal with this struggle, this emotion, this problem I have with how I react to things. And it may be from things in your past or just from us being broken, but you need to figure out what that looks like, and whether that's just asking for a trusted friend to hold you accountable, going and talking to a pastor, or maybe getting professional help, finding a counselor, find someone who can help you with that. Do whatever it takes to deal with your brokenness. Because while it's okay to admit that we're broken, I don't think we need to stay broken. Yeah. God wants to heal us and free us and move us forward. And so we've got to find the help that we need to do that. Mm-hmm. And then I also would encourage you, we mentioned a couple times in this series, Dr. Kimball's book, Why Do Christian Kids Rebel? If you have got major issues going on in yourself or with your kids and some of these things we've talked about, his book is a really good resource to kind of maybe dig through, give you some deeper answers and some deeper places to go. So if you're looking for more on this, that's where I would encourage you to go next.
Good stuff. So as we wrap up, our 2 takeaways, and the first is just say you're sorry this week. When those times where maybe you realize you've messed up or you've blown it, is to be willing to take that step back and ask for forgiveness and admit that brokenness. And then the second thing is if you haven't checked out the first part of this series, is to go back and check out part 1 of this, where we talk about what happens when our kids blow it and how we should respond to that.
All right.
Be abnormal.